is that the amendments be agreed to, and with that I give the call to the most honourable member for Canning.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Well, Deputy Speaker, the world is currently undergoing a period, at least in the Western industrialised world, of rapid reindustrialisation. After 40 years of globalisation, underwritten by US security and the institutions that rose up out of the rubble of World War II, our countries are now reindustrialising. They're looking to recover lost manufacturing and lost jobs. Gone are the days of labour and wage arbitrage where a lot of manufacturing was offshored to cheaper countries and jurisdictions for the production of goods that we need. We've seen real wages decline over the last 30 or 40 years for workers in the industrial sector, and strategic circumstances are forcing many countries to look at their own industrial base and ask the question, are we sovereign, are we resilient, and are we self-reliant? I think Ukraine and the war that started there in early 2022, Russia's illegal, unjustified and immoral invasion of Ukraine, has brought this into stark relief. And what we've seen over the last 2 years is that war transform into a war of attrition, industrial attrition, where we've seen the United States, which supports Ukraine, and its allies like the UK, the US, European allies like Germany and France particularly, pitted against the industrial base of Russia, which is also supported by China, North Korea and Iran. So we're seeing a war where thousands and thousands of people have already died, that it's now grinding into a war of industrial attrition. And it's a reminder to people around the world that if you want to have sovereignty, if you want to be secure as a nation, if you want to have resilience, you've got to have industrial capacity. It's a key component of national power. And so that's why we're seeing investment in industrial bases across the world, and the US is leading this. And I refer to a report that came out last month. It's called the Commission on the National Defence Strategy. It's a document that is well worth reading for all parliamentarians. And in it, the authors, quite eminent national security people in the United States, they make some fairly stark judgments about the state of the US and its industrial production. And it says that the US industrial production is grossly inadequate to provide the equipment, technology and munitions needed today, let alone given the demands of great power conflict. There's reasons for that in the US. There's been insufficient defence budgets. There's been a decline of research and development. There's been insufficient access to strategic and critical minerals. And there's been an erosion of the broader US manufacturing ecosystem. We can trace that back to 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. The US stood supreme as the global power with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and a lot of the investment that occurred during the Cold War ceased, and we've seen the US military decrease as well as the industrial base that supported it. And now what we're seeing is a challenge to the US-led rules-based global order, if that's what you want to call it. That's what a lot of policy people refer to it as. And because that's being challenged, countries are now having to look to their own security needs, which includes a strong industrial base. The challenge is now for allies of the US who buy a lot of defence capabilities from the US is that there's a long queue, and the US can't even meet its own needs with its shrunk industrial base, and so we need to start thinking about how we recover our industrial capacity as well. And that's why AUKUS is such a huge opportunity for Australia. And I think if we're going to use any mechanism to recover Australian industrial strength, AUKUS is the best mechanism to do so. I was proud of the coalition government back in 2021 that struck the original arrangement with President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and we've since seen two changes of government, one here and one in the UK, and still AUKUS continues strongly. But there's a lot of work to be done, and the decline of the US industrial base is a real challenge for AUKUS. We need the US to uplift, we need the UK to uplift, and we ourselves need to uplift. So the bill before the House, the Future Made in Australia bill, really engages on this question. How do we recover a lot of our lost industrial capacity in this country? And our view, my view, is that this bill does not achieve what the Albanese government is setting out to achieve with this bill. Now, just to give some background on the bill, these bills expand the role of Export Finance Australia and the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. It establishes a national interest framework that retrospectively underpins the government's Future Made in Australia policy. The accompanying bill expands Export Finance Australia's remit to fund domestic industries, and it nominates the Minister for Finance as an additional responsible minister. The Omnibus Bill also expands ARENA's functions from a pure research and development and demonstration to support manufacturing, deployment and commercialisation. But, Deputy Speaker, the more we hear about this plan, the more we realise that Labor is misguided in this, and it just doesn't stack up. This is a plan for more government, not business investment partnering with government. And that makes it a weak plan. And in fact, we believe that this is a plan for more inflation at a time when Labor has already made homegrown inflation a lot worse. We know they've added $315 billion worth of spending to the budget over the last 2 years, and we're still leading the world in inflation. It hasn't come back under control towards the 2 to 3% target range, which is where we want to get it to. And again, the Australian people are suffering with high interest rates, with no relief in sight. I know markets are pricing in a cut somewhere around February or so, but there's no guarantee because we're seeing what the Queensland government is doing to save its skin up in prior to the election in October. They're spending a lot of money. You've got the Victorian government, you've got the WA government spending a lot of money. There's no guarantee that inflation is going to abate any time soon. Now, the Coalition has always supported industry and manufacturing. I think back to Robert Menzies and the economy he inherited when he won government back in 1949. A great economy. It had been built up during World War II, and it was the basis of our prosperity for the next couple of decades until we opened ourselves up to the world under Prime Minister Bob Hawke. But Labor's policy here on energy and industrial relations and tax, it's a whole suite of policies. It's a whole range of things that have occurred under Prime Minister Anthony Albanese over the last 2 years. It's actually made Australia less competitive, less attractive for international investment, and they've also introduced an industrial relations reform package which has also made it a lot more difficult for businesses to employ people and to make a profit and add to Australia's prosperity. That's why we are actually going backwards as a country in terms of productivity, in terms of GDP growth, and people are feeling it. Real wages are going backwards with inflation, and of course we're seeing households less well off now than they were 2 years ago under the Labor government. The facts are clear. Insolvencies are up, productivity is down, and businesses are struggling just to keep the doors open. And so Labor's plan for a future made in Australia, it's a great little line, and I always remember the Made in Australia tags on Australian goods growing up with that kangaroo. We still see them. I get quite nostalgic about it. I'm proud of an Australia that can make things and sell them to the world. So they're tapping into nostalgia with a title, but when you actually examine the bills and the policy and the detail, it falls far short of the nostalgia that it seeks to evoke. Now, there are some challenges here. The ARENA changes. This is a slush fund for the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. This legislation changes the purpose, duties and roles of ARENA, which has always been a research and development agency. They're now expanding the remit of ARENA into deployment and manufacturing. And these changes give the Minister for Climate Change the ability to boost the funding of ARENA without parliamentary oversight or scrutiny, which has been a habit of the Labor government over the last 2 years. They like to get things through, they like to guillotine debate, and they like to empower the ministers to make decisions that avoid the parliamentary oversight or scrutiny. And you just look at the sitting calendar this year, it's been reduced significantly. All that does is allow for less accountability, and that's not in the best interests of the Australian people nor our country over the long term. Australian families are paying the price. We've already seen the 12 interest rate hikes, and we've got some of the most stubborn core inflation in the developed world and higher taxes that come with it. Bracket creep is hurting a lot of families out there, particularly in my seat of Canning, and again, this has all happened under the Albanese government. There's also a new national interest framework, and this legislation puts the Treasurer and his department in a position to decide whether a sector of the Australian economy deserves investment. This is less a market-led solution. Instead, it's a command economy style solution. And when you run a command style economy, you assume that those running it have all the knowledge required to make good investment decisions. And as we know, you just look at the last 100 years, you'll see indeed that command economies aren't great at making investment decisions. There's a lot of inefficiencies, there's a lot of waste, there's a lot of preferment and nepotism, and all those sorts of problems that come with people making decisions without all the information and without the accountability that a market-led solution brings. So that is deeply problematic, and I expect bad decisions, not good decisions, with this framework. What we do in this place is we try and create incentives that will build the security and prosperity of our country, incentives that provide for human flourishing. And the incentives that this bill brings in, I think, fall far short of those aspirations. But don't take my word for it. The Business Council of Australia have warned that these procurement rules risk subsidising businesses Australia would never have a comparative advantage in. We are a nation that is blessed with an abundance of resources. That's why we lead the world in exports, in coal and liquefied natural gas. I represent a seat which used to be Kim Beazley's seat 25, 30 years ago, which tells you everything you need to know about the realignment happening in Australia and elsewhere. We produce about 10 to 11% of the world's bauxite. 2 bauxite mines, 2 alumina refineries. I represent a lot of FIFO workers who leave their families and go to our mine sites, and they're the backbone of this country's prosperity, and I'm very proud to represent them. I'm proud that we have a good number of them who are keen to see us become more productive. And I acknowledge that many are unionised members with the AWU, and one of the things I've really worked on is having a good relationship with those people, because they are the backbone of this country, and they do the heavy lifting that provides for a lot of the revenue that is used to fund essential services in this country. I'm really excited, though, about the investment that the former coalition government took in AUKUS. And I acknowledge the work that this government has done in building on that work with the announcement of the optimal pathway for a nuclear submarine, the Virginia-class submarine, and also SSN AUKUS. So when we're talking about reindustrialising Australia, I want to focus very briefly on Western Australia. We know that $8 billion of investment is going to flow through Perth, especially just to the north of Canning in Rockingham. $8 billion to expand HMAS Stirling over the next decade, 3,000 direct jobs created. There'll be an additional $83 million for infrastructure works, which will create more than 150 jobs. And this isn't just once off. We're going to see a huge naval base at Stirling, which will run our nuclear submarines. We'll also have US and UK submarines. We'll have the supply chains, the maintenance facilities to keep those running. We're going to see a big footprint, and I think one of the toughest things any country can do is own, operate and build their own submarines. We are undertaking the biggest nation-building project I think we've ever done, because this is going to be very complex. It's good that we're doing it with the US and the UK, who already have capability and are experienced. So I'm actually excited for industry. But this government is not selling that. Instead, they're following the Climate Change Minister on his frolics, talking about green energy and all these great solar panels and wind farms that we made in China, when we could be talking about AUKUS and the economic dividend and the job creation and the industrial rebuild that will bring to this country. And this government's failing, and they need to do better.
The member's time has expired. The question is that the amendment moved by the honourable member for Kooyong be agreed